House baseball in the bloodlines as I do. It is opening day. It is opening week. It's a time of revival and a time for predictions as well. This guy has been really a life in baseball, for crying out loud. I remember him as the longtime PR director of the Montreal Expos. I don't think he ever wore the Yuppie suit, but I know he knows where they stored it at Olympic Stadium. He's been covering the Blue Jays now for 2 decades at the Toronto Star. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at @RGriffinStar. We welcome Richard Griffin in, who has a wonderful Twitter meme as well as a Twitter stream that many, many Canadians follow. And the Blue Jays, time will tell whether they're relevant this year, but certainly for this week, they are the Orioles' nemesis. And Richard, last time we got together, Zach Britton was playing the same role I was playing. He was watching baseball. Kind of a weird way to end last year, and sort of a nice little way to begin this year, I think, right?
Yeah, it was for sure, and there's no denying that Buck Showalter is the class of the managers in the AL East, but on that one night of the wild card, it seemed a little strange that we were all on the sideline, including Zach, and it gave the Blue Jays an opportunity to advance to the ALCS for the second season in a row, and we'll just have to see if they're able to get to the postseason again. There have been some changes. I don't think they're as good a team as they were last year, and I didn't think that team was as good as the second half of 2015. So time will tell. We'll just have to see.
You know, that's been a theme here, and I'm glad you brought it up because when I bring it up, they call me negative around here. Imagine that, Rich. The team was in last place for a decade and a half, and I had to write about it. I know you're familiar with the winning and the losing. Toronto was dormant for the longest time. Heck, I was up there 2 years ago in June, and there was nobody in the Dome, and 8 weeks later, Tulowitzki's there, and Price is there, and, the whole country's on board. You're Canadian. You spent so much time in Montreal, and they always tried to make it work there, and after the strike, it didn't, and nobody's more intimately familiar with that than you, but there has really been a revival for baseball, not only in Toronto, but throughout the country, and it feels to me like the last 2 off seasons, the Blue Jays have been underwhelming versus what they were in the era of Winfield and Carter and Henderson and, picking up guys, David Wells back in the day. That's not what the Blue Jays have done, nor have the Orioles done that. You guys got a Baltimore guy running the team up there now, Mark Shapiro.
Yeah, it was funny. You speak about the second half of 2015 when all of a sudden Rogers Center started to be jammed. And the interesting thing is, and I've always admired the crowds that show up at Camden Yards, but the crowd all of a sudden became younger, and there were more women involved in coming to the games. And I think that was what they needed, because those teams of the early 90s, the World Series teams in 92 and 93 for the Blue Jays, that crowd was aging, and they needed a new fan base, and they've got it. And this fan base doesn't remember 92, 93, that their Blue Jays are the Jose Bautista Blue Jays and the Edwin Encarnacion Blue Jays and the 2015-2016 playoff Blue Jays. So it's interesting. It's almost a whole reinvention of the franchise, and they're doing a good job with it. As you said, Mark Shapiro came in, and it's funny because he came in for a rebuild. He was hired in July of 2015 and only took over officially on November 1st. But all of a sudden, he went from a rebuild to inheriting a team that had made it within a win of the World Series and a team that looked poised to win again. So all of a sudden, his mindset had to do a complete about-face, and they've been forced to continue trying to win, because otherwise the fan base has showed that they won't go if they're not winning, if they're not a winning team, if they're not a contending team. And it's funny how he's had to do an about-face all in the space of 6 months from when he was hired to when he officially took over.
Richard Griffin joining us here, longtime baseball man, first with the Montreal Expos. He's been covering the Blue Jays for 2 decades now as a baseball columnist for the Toronto Star. Also TSN Radio Blue Jays analyst. You said something that I've been saying, which is this team's not as good as it was last October. Certainly for the Orioles, I feel the same way. Both of these teams had regress in the offseason here over the last 2 years instead of moving forward. I don't don't know where the young stars are coming from with the Orioles. I mean, they have no pipeline for the back end of their rotation. They're station to station. They're not going to get on base a whole lot. And for the Blue Jays, they get on base a little bit more, but it really is about the long ball and the loss of Encarnacion. All of us around here wondering what life's going to be like without Manny Machado in a couple of years. For the Blue Jays, they've made a lot of money and they've inspired the whole country. And when it came time to sign Encarnacion, they didn't have the belly for it.
Yeah, I think there was a whole misread of the market by a lot of teams last year, especially, I think Encarnacion could be lumped in with Trumbo and that sort of situation where the Jays made their best offer, which turned out to be the same offer Edwin signed for in Cleveland eventually, but they made their first offer, and when Encarnacion said, I'd like to sit back and explore the market, they went out and signed Kendrys Morales, who's not Edwin Encarnacion. He's a switch hitter. He has some power. They're relying on the fact that StatCast tell him that the ballparks that he was playing in previously weren't home run hitters park. Now he goes to Rogers Center, which is a home run hitters park. So they're expecting him to take over from Edwin Encarnacion's role behind Jose Bautista and Josh Donaldson. And I just don't see him being the same type player. He's not as athletic, and to me, he's not the same run producer Encarnacion is. So right there, they're not as good a team as they were. They were relentless 1-8 before. Now they're relentless 1-6. And that's a third of the batting order that is not a giveaway, but is certainly not going to put up the numbers that they have in the past. They're relying now on a starting rotation that's solid 1-5. There's no real ace in that rotation, but there's no number 5 in the rotation either. So they're very good. They're very deep. You go into a 3-game series, you've got a chance to win all 3 games, but there's not one game you're pointing to where, oh, this is the one we're going to win, we just have to win another, because they don't have a real ace in that rotation, and they're relying on health, because if one of those guys get hurt, they traded away the depth in the second half of 2015 to be able to compete that year and in 2016. So it's a different Blue Jays team. It's one that I don't think is as good.
Well, I didn't love the offseason they had last year. I mean, I complained about it on behalf of all of the nice Canadian folks up there. The J Happ thing, I don't know that it could have worked out any better in year one. I don't know how that's sustainable for him. I mean, obviously Sanchez was incredible last year as well. I don't know if that's sustainable, but I love seeing Stroman throw the ball better for Team USA and, for all of those guys that went off and played in the World Baseball Classic. I know, everybody has angst about them getting injured and whatnot, but, playing at that level of competition that we saw 2 weeks ago, that can only help. And I think Stroman's poised to be better this year, and I would not be shocked to see him step right in where Sanchez or Happ left off last year.
Yeah, there's no doubt Stroman is on the rise in terms of production and what he can do, throwing 200 innings, maybe winning 15 ball games. But Sanchez, I think, is underrated, even with the season that he had last season, because when they had to make the deal for R.A. Dickey, and I don't think they had to make the deal for R.A. Dickey and gave Noah Syndergaard to the Mets, it was a situation where they considered Syndergaard and Aaron Sanchez on the same level of development in the farm system. And, of course, Syndergaard went over and the Mets accelerated his development. The Blue Jays are notoriously slow in developing their own starting pitchers. They restrict their pitch count, they restrict their innings count, and that came into play last year. But they really felt at the time, and it's a possibility that Sanchez could develop into the sort of impact pitcher that Syndergaard has been. So, I'll put him and Stroman into the can't miss category in terms of what Blue Jays fans should be looking for. But J Happ came in as a left-hander, pretty much replacing David Price, who priced himself out of the Blue Jays market and went to the Red Sox. So they got a great break when Happ won 20 games, but he was getting almost 7 runs a game in support, and that's not going to happen again. So, you look at a downtick from him, but if you have Stroman and Sanchez on the rise, then maybe they can balance that out. But again, they need great health.
He is Richard Griffin. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at @RGriffinStar, longtime baseball columnist up in Toronto, throughout Canada, and a longtime PR director of the Montreal Expos. When are you writing that book, Griff?
Yeah, no, I'm meeting a literary agent on Friday when I get
See?
back from Baltimore. So
I know a good book when I hear one. And,
yeah.
The good book might be that they get a franchise back. And, I saw a story here on Sunday, because this is the 25th anniversary of Camden Yards, that 5 years from now, Mr. Angelos is going to have to, and I'm sure he's going to live till he's 120 at this point. Someone's going to have to renew a lease at Camden Yards. It is crazy that 25 years into this thing, this stadium's been here, and we're talking about a second lease deal now. It feels like it was 5 minutes ago, but it's now been, a decade and a half since Montreal had baseball, and the Nationals are very alive and well. It is fascinating how this whole thing is played out, especially for those of you who have a whole closet of Yuppie stuff, from many, many years, of all of those years with the Expos. And there's real, as much as when they left, it was like, well, who wants them? There's nobody here. There's nobody going to the games. There's nostalgia around the Expos now, and I know there's a movement afoot in Quebec to try to get baseball back, right?
Yeah, definitely. They've played 2 exhibition games, the Blue Jays have, against various opponents the last 4 years, and they've drawn 95. They drew 95,000 this year against the Pirates for 2 games, 2 exhibition games, and they drew over 100,000 against the Red Sox last year for the 2. And Yuppie shows up for those. I gave Yuppie a hug and took a selfie with him the other day. So it's all good, and they have ownership in place. In fact, Stephen Brofman, who's Charles Brofman's son, the original owner of the Expos, he's the front man. He's front and center in that group. So they feel they have the money in place. They just need the opportunity with Major League Baseball through expansion or relocation. And to me, it would have to be expansion, a situation where a team is awarded, and the same way they've been doing lately, 2 years later, they play their first game. That would give them time to build a downtown stadium, and they have plans in place for that. They just have been taking it slowly at the recommendation of Rob Manfred and the commissioner's office, and just don't create any waves, and we've got you in mind is the situation up there.
In your mind, could it work?
Yeah, MLB is the one that drove the franchise out of Montreal. They tried to contract in 2001, if you'll recall, along with the Minnesota Twins. And the Twins, the government there, the congressmen and the senators, they didn't want that to happen, so they couldn't just contract Montreal. So Montreal was purchased by MLB, who ran it into the ground because they wanted to get a franchise down in Washington. So they dissed the stadium, they dissed the location, they dissed the fans. And why would fans want to come out to games when they're being dismissed by MLB? And that's what happened there. The last 4 years, they had some pretty good, they had some pretty good prospects, traded them all away. Omar Minaya had his hands tied as GM by MLB. They didn't want to spend any money, and they wanted a team in Washington, and that's what happened. So now they have a legitimate ownership that would be interested in marketing the team properly. Yeah, they could make it work with a downtown stadium, 40,000 people. I think it would be very viable.
Griff, for the Blue Jays this year and for the American League East, I started to think about this, and I didn't think much about it during the offseason. I've been watching the Capitals, and I know you're familiar with hockey up there. We got a pretty good team here, as do the Canadians and the Leafs. I might be up in Toronto in 2 weeks watching the Caps play first-round action against the Leafs. But for the baseball side and the American League East, it's the Red Sox, right? And all the rest of us are just trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the only thing that could mess it up in Boston is John Farrell. But, he was in Toronto for 2 years, and his dream job was going to Boston and working with the Red Sox, and so they let him out of his deal there. They won a World Series the first year, and they have, obviously, adding Chris Sale and a bunch of young hitters that has not been the traditional Red Sox way. Red Sox have always gone with veteran guys, with free agent guys, with an older type lineup with David Ortiz, and now they've got a bunch of good young hitters, and I think certainly they have enough starting pitching, and they got a great closer. So how could they not be the favorite the prohibitive favorite in the AL East, and I think that everybody else is battling for a wild card in my mind. But like they say, play ball, because it doesn't sometimes what seems right on paper doesn't end up that way.
What do you expect out of Joey Bats here this summer? I know that's been a big conjecture. And, I thought Encarnacion was going to be a cornerstone guy in Toronto, that if they were going to spend money on somebody, it would have been on him. I think a lot of people were shocked to see either one of them back. Batista came back because, really, there was not a market for him.
Right. At the end of last season, I was projecting or suggesting that same thing as you just said, that they needed to bring one of those guys back, because you can't lose the 3-4 hitters in your lineup and expect to be the same offensive team. And I thought Edwin would be the right guy to bring back. And when they lost him, then all of a sudden the priority became, in my mind, Jose Bautista. And they slow played him to the point where they got him back on a pretty good deal. And I think that the bulletin board material was provided by Dan Duquette in the off season when he said that Oriole fans hate him, and so he's been asked about that all spring. He's in really good shape.
By the way, what a stupid thing for a general manager to say. I mean, Duquette says a lot of stupid stuff, and doesn't take questions from guys like me. But of all the things you could say, we don't want to sign a quality player that we could have a need for because our fans don't like him. I mean, that doesn't even make sense.
On introductions on opening day, the fans will just they'll go crazy. So, but the thing about what Duquette said is, I worked with him in Montreal. I mean, he was the GM there, and he can be a loose cannon that way in terms of that type of statement. But Bautista is using it. Bautista is poised to me to have a good year. He had a great spring. He missed a couple of games because of a back problem, but I think that was more precautionary than anything. And I think that they needed to bring one of the two guys back, and they got one, so we'll see how it goes. They'll roll the dice with that.
Griff, always great visiting with you, man. Good luck with your manuscript in your book. And, I will say this. I've been all over the world, traveling around. I was walking on the streets of Australia in Brisbane, Australia, about 8 weeks ago, and I saw someone wearing an Expos hat. And I thought, you know what, man? The Expos are cool again if they're wearing Expos hats in Australia, right?
Yeah, we're big in the hip-hop community, too, so that's all good.
You still refer to the Expos as we. I love that. Hey, man, we'll be following you at R. Griffin Star. Let's stay in touch and have a good season up there in TL. I might be up there for a little hockey in a couple of weeks. I know that nothing will get Toronto more energized than a Leafs Cup run, right?
Okay, thanks, Nestor. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Richard Griffin, R. Griffin Star, baseball columnist at the Toronto Star. You can also follow him at rgriffinstar.com. Longtime Montreal Expos PR director and baseball historian, I will say, after 50 years in baseball as well, with Richard Griffin. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net, anywhere the internet is served, 24 hours a day. That's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Even in Montreal and Toronto, we come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper delivers to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's all powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Don't forget our London trip with the Ravens up and running. $100 discount for anyone who's been on a WNST road trip. You can toss me a note. We'll make sure we get you taken care of for that. And, of course, the NFL schedule coming out with Green Bay, Nashville, Minnesota, and wherever the Raiders decide to play. We're going to have some trips this year. Should be a fun fall for everyone into the football thing. But it is baseball week here in baseball time. Luke's at the ballpark. We'll be monitoring all of that. If there's any breaking news, you will get it first on the WNST text service. That is brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday, driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend. Baseball, basketball, we got hockey, we got the NFL draft coming up in Philadelphia in a couple of weeks, the Liars Luncheon this week. It is a big time around here, and anything you miss, you can find in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault at WNST.net. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports. Griff.